I don't know what they have to say. It makes no difference anyway. Whatever it is, I'm against it. No matter what it is or who commenced it, I'm against it. Your proposition may be good, but let's have one thing understood. Whatever it is, I'm against it. And even when you've changed it or condensed it, I'm against it. I'm opposed to it. On general principles, I'm opposed to it. He's opposed to it. In fact, he's opposed to it.
Folks, the Russian Revolution of 1917 will never happen again. The Chinese Revolution of 1949 will never happen again. The Paris Commune of 1871 will never happen again. You just need to face that fact. History does not repeat itself. New things happen. New victories will be won. New socialist revolutions will take place. Socialism exists very widely in the world today and will continue to exist in the world today in new ways. But to believe that the only way that something can be socialism is if it is somehow a copy of events that took place in the 20th century is simply delusional. Things just don't work that way. The folks who go around today and say, oh, China can't be socialist because it has a market sector, that's not real socialism. People who go around and say, oh, Venezuela can't be socialist because they took power in elections, so that's not real socialism. They didn't violently storm the barricades. They didn't seize the Winter Palace like in 1917, so that's not real socialism. People who say that are the equivalent of, imagine in 1917, someone running around and saying to the Bolsheviks, what are you doing? The Paris Commune, they did things completely differently than you're doing. You're a revisionist. Imagine that in 1949, as Mao was waging a revolution among the peasantry and organizing in the countryside, you ran up to Mao and said, you can't do that. The Russian Revolution started in the cities. You're a revisionist. This isn't real revolution. This isn't real communism. Folks, Fidel Castro, when he led the Cuban Revolution, was not a member of the Communist Party. He was not a member of the Communist Party. His brother Raul was a member of the Communist Party, but his brother Raul actually broke discipline in order to participate in the Cuban Revolution. The Cuban Communist Party had seats in the parliament in Cuba. They had supported Batista because Batista had overthrown a Francoist and a fascist government and was aligned with the United States. And the Cuban Communist Party didn't initially support the Cuban Revolution. And it wasn't until Fidel Castro was already winning that the Cuban Communist Party eventually supported Fidel Castro, and Fidel Castro didn't declare Cuba to be on the road to socialism until, I believe, 1962, right? Mao, what he did in the countryside in China was something that had never been done before in world history. Never had peasants been the ones to make the revolution. And he had to fight against his own party in order to carry it out. Socialism exists all over the world in many different ways. Marxist-Leninist parties are in power in China, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cuba, in North Korea. Bolivarian socialist parties that you bet have studied Marxism, Leninism up and down, are aligned with official communist parties. They're in power in Latin America. Ba'athist Arab socialism is a mass movement in the Middle East. There are other forms of socialism that have come into existence. This assumption that socialism is stagnant, that socialism is almost like a religion, and if you don't, adhere to the religious doctrine in the right way, that you're a heretic, and you're violating the true principles, is a deeply problematic way of viewing the world. History is in motion. Socialism is constantly changing. Socialism is adapting to conditions of the modern world. And if you want to be part of the world as it exists, you have to acknowledge that. If your socialism is simply an expression of alienation, if you're mad at the world as it exists, you feel it's unfair, well, by all means, rage against not only the existing capitalist power structure, but also all the socialist opposition for not being true. Be the one true socialist all alone by yourself, tantruming against the world. Do that if that's what you want to do. But that's not the role that Marxists play. Let's not forget that Karl Marx was a big supporter of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln was not a Marxist, but Karl Marx understood thoroughly that the struggle to abolish slavery in the United States would be a great victory for the working class of the world, and that by having Marxists play an essential role in that struggle, they could be on the right side of history, they could expand Marxist ideas. Marxism is an ideology based on contradiction. It's this understanding that when there are two things in the world that cannot coexist, they clash. There is a thesis, it cannot coexist with something else, it contradicts something else. That's called an antithesis. And a thesis and antithesis clash and they create a synthesis. Duality. Change through contradiction. This is Marxism. This notion that Marxism is a holy doctrine, it's a utopian way of establishing heaven on earth, that if you just apply and say the right magic words and follow the holy rules, you will get the best results, that's not Marxism. That is not Marxism. And that this belief that everything in the world today that doesn't fit the 20th century model shouldn't be studied is absurd. The 20th century model of socialism, what you might call real socialism, really existing socialism, it had a lot of problems. And those problems contributed to the fall of the Soviet Union. And the socialist countries of the world today have adjusted a great deal since that time. Have they made mistakes since then? Of course. Are there things that they did wrong in response to the fall of really existing socialism and the socialism of the Cold War? Of course. But it's a process. And to just simply condemn everything and to simply declare that there were these one true good periods in the 20th century, that the Soviet Union was good until Stalin's death, or the Soviet Union was good until the overthrow of Trotsky, or until the rise of Stalin, or the Paris Commune was good but everything else was bad, or that there was some pure anarchism in Spain. This is silliness. You're not really playing a role. You're not really playing a role in the world as it currently exists if you espouse such nonsense, right? There is a big contradiction in the world today. There are two economies in the world today. There's the Western capitalist economy centered around Wall Street and London and the IMF and the World Bank. And there's a rising alternative on the global stage led by Russia and China, the Eurasian alternative. And China's state-controlled, centrally planned economy, with its One Belt, One Road initiative that is raising people out of poverty, is pretty essential to it. The Bolivarian countries, with their Marxist leaders, are also pretty essential to it. There is a rising block of opposition to Western capitalism in the world today. There is an alternative economy where countries trade with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation. And if you just look at this and say, well, this isn't what Stalin did in the 1930s, this isn't what Trotsky would have approved of, this isn't Mao and the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, if you say that, well, good for you, I guess. You can have nothing to do with it, and you can be isolated. But I'm urging you to think like a Marxist and not think in this manner. Socialism is about construction. It's about building a better life for the people. It's not about being isolated from society. It's not about longing for some big catastrophe to punish everyone who gets in your way. Socialism is about growth. It's about creating material abundance. It's about getting over the irrationality of capitalism, planning out the economy, raising people out of poverty, and moving toward a state of material abundance. So much abundance, we hope, that someday the need for any coercion or state could fade away. The vision of a society where everyone has what they need, technology has advanced so much, and the economy has so vastly expanded that any need for wages or police or a state or coercion fades away. That's a beautiful vision, but it's only possible when the material abundance of society vastly expands and when the economy has so greatly expanded through economic planning, when there is so much. That's the only way the ultimate vision of communism is possible. This is an economic vision. And that is what is missing from so much discourse. Don't be a Groucho Marxist. Don't be simply alone, isolated, and raging against the world in a state of alienation. Understand the world around you. Participate in the existing struggles of the day. Analyze the contradictions in the world today. That's actual Marxism.